I'm Scott Snibbe, and this is How to Train a Happy Mind. Instead of the episode we had planned to share today, a meditation from Tenzin Chogkyi as part of her beautiful conversation on joy, we're postponing that release by a week. In its place, I'm sharing a meditation I led just a couple of days ago with our Train a Happy Mind community. This meditation was recorded the day after the United States launched a new bombing campaign in Iran. In response, I wanted to reflect on the roots of violence, both in our world and in our minds, and to offer a path toward peace that I've learned from my Tibetan Buddhist teachers. If you find value in this podcast and want to support our mission of helping people like you lead happy lives, nurture fulfilling relationships, and build a better world, you can do so at howtotrainahappymind.org. Your support makes a real difference, and we accept both cash and cryptocurrencies. Here's my talk and meditation. If you enjoy it, you can join our community for free or by donation at trainahappymind.org. After a while, I decided to try not to respond too much to current events in these sessions because we always get derailed from the sequence of trying to learn the stages of the path. But I think I'd rather do something different today and address directly the fact that, the United States just bombed Iran, and we started another violent chapter in this decades-long pattern. I was really crushed when I saw the news. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and lead a meditation on trying to end war and cultivate peace. I remember I was in college when the Gulf War began. The first, you might say, which one? When the first Gulf War began in 1990, I was in college. I was 20 years old. And my high school girlfriend was visiting me. I hadn't seen her in years, and she came down and we had dinner and kind of reconnected, and I apologized for being a jerk sometimes, things like that. And she slept over just on the couch. And then that morning, we got up, we went out to breakfast, and then saw that we had started this war in the Middle East, and we were completely shocked. We did, for a few minutes, we just didn't know what to say at all. Because we thought war was outmoded. She and I happened to be born right when the Vietnam War ended. So in our whole life, up to age 20, we didn't see America enter a war. And so it was easy to think that the time was over. If you grew up and America had never been in a war, it felt like war was old-fashioned and out of date. But as we see, it's not, unfortunately. It may be old-fashioned, but it's not out of date. I remember, I don't know how many of you know who Donald Rumsfeld was. He was our Secretary of Defense at that time, or at one time. And I remember him gleefully singing "Bomb Iran" to the tune of this Beach Boys song. I mentioned Brian Wilson a couple weeks. It's funny because I was talking about Brian Wilson, and then just a couple days later they announced his death, But he wrote a song called Barbara Ann, if you know, kind of a cute harmony song I was playing for my daughter the other day. But these men, Donald Rumsfeld, they would sing "Bomb Iran." They'd say "Bomb, bomb, 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 bomb Iran," which is, I have to admit, it's slightly funny, but not really when you start to think about what they're saying. People like him had been trying to find some excuse to bomb Iran for decades, but we didn't have the reason. We didn't have a political justification for it. But when these announcements, sadly it's happened a few more times in life when different wars began, and I look at my emotional response, and you may have a similar one, which is that I do feel a little bit of a surge of excitement when you see, ooh, we dropped these powerful bombs and maybe we destroyed the nuclear program. But I look at my own mind and I see, why do I feel that way? And I think it's just thanks to all the conditioning, like all the war movies that we've seen, all the Marvel films. Like in all these movies, there's this classical music, this rousing classical music that comes as the planes go off, as the spaceships go off, as the boats go off, with these heroes who are going to finally defeat the enemy. So you feel the same thing. We've been conditioned to feel really excited when people go off to war. But we don't get the same result in real life that we have in those movies, because what follows is grief, real people dying. No matter how much we disagree with their actions, the people that were killed yesterday, they're human beings. They're somebody's parent, they're somebody's child, they're somebody's teacher, they're somebody's friend. I did a little research preparing for this morning to see what the Dalai Lama said about being drawn to war like this. I found a great talk that he gave, and I'd never heard this or read this before. I have this, what he said. He said, even the Dalai Lama admitted being drawn to war as a child. He said, the soldiers' uniforms looked so smart and beautiful, but that is exactly how the seduction begins. Children start playing games that will one day lead them into trouble. He's always so gentle, when he talks about people who commit some of the worst things. But of course he grew beyond this illusion. He saw that it wasn't, that what soldiers did wasn't so seductive when you look into it. When I first saw him speak, many of you know I wrote about this in the book. The Dalai Lama said something I'll never forget, and that made me really deeply respect him. He said, if you kill one Chinese person, you make 100 Chinese enemies. I'm not sure, many people have heard anything like that in their life, but it's very, very logical and very true. Do any of you know any Iranian people? Raise your hand if you do. My wife's grandfather is Iranian. He lived to 104. He's a very influential, relatively peaceful human being. He was the ambassador to Canada from Iran, and a great scholar, an engineer, scientist, father, obviously, of my mother-in-law. My cousin's Iranian, half Iranian. My aunt's fully Iranian. So that means my daughter is 1/8 Iranian, I guess. The Iranians I know don't like to say Iranian. They like to say Persian, because that is the millennia's long culture that they have created. Iran is a more recent nation created, but the culture is thousands of years old. My wife's been to Iran. I have pictures of her visiting there, all very peaceful and gentle, The people, as far as I have heard, from anybody I know who's been there, the people, they're warm, they're loving, they're humble. If you admire an object in an Iranian's home, you say, what a nice vase. They give it to you. My wife has a vase like that. She said, oh, what a nice vase. They give it to you. It's part of their culture that if you like something, if someone says they like something, you have to give it to them. It's very, very sweet. And also, a lot, maybe most of them, long for democracy and freedom. They're not particularly happy with their leadership. So it's not the people, it's not the Iranian people that's a problem. It's a small number of powerful extremists who somehow bubble up to the most powerful positions in our world today. And that happens in many countries, including sometimes our own, as we all know, and depending on your perspective. Buddhist perspective is that a war is not a path to peace. It should be kind of obvious, you know. It's an old, outmoded idea. I had another quote from the Dalai Lama. He talks about this so much. The Dalai Lama said, in the contemporary, deeply interdependent world, war is outdated and illogical. It really is illogical. It doesn't make sense. What did we just accomplish with this bombing? I went and looked at many different sources. Maybe we set back Iran's nuclear program by a year or two, possibly. But they may have some sites, some secret sites underground. Some experts say they're still just months away from making a nuclear bomb. So what do we accomplish, you know? And then what are the risks of the escalation and retaliation? Or inflaming a bigger war in the Middle East. So is it really worth it to do something like that? And it's also worth noting, you know, I try to say all of this without any political slant, because this is just about a universal respect for human life, you know. But it's worth noting that Israel has a nuclear weapons program. You know, they're said to have dozens of weapons, and it's widely known, but it's never been officially acknowledged, never sanctioned. I come from a Jewish background, I think some of you know. So if we're generally concerned about nuclear proliferation, why do we tolerate one Middle Eastern country's unsanctioned nuclear program and not the other one? So kind of double standards, they don't promote peace, and they make our own nation look cynical, you know, that we're not really standing for nuclear non-proliferation. So these kind of double standards, they inflame distrust, resentment, ultimately more conflict. We had a working agreement. It took a long time, but we had a working agreement with Iran, you know, a treaty. And it takes years to negotiate. You know, diplomacy takes time, but it saves lives, and it works. It seems kind of boring and frustrating, but it's not. It doesn't kill people, you know, or destroy property and the planet. And you know, there's many reasons that deal fell apart, but in the end, it was our own country that walked away from the diplomatic solution. So force hasn't solved this and problems like it in the past, and it won't solve it now. Lately, I've been thinking about all the wars that America fought since World War II, and just wondering, did any of them achieve their goals? You know, how many soldiers and civilians died needlessly, like losing their lives to cycles of violence that didn't resolve anything? You know, only listening, negotiating, compassion can address the problems the world faces today, because those are the tools that build understanding instead of destruction. You know, the costs of war are so extraordinary. The Manhattan Project, it was something like 10% of the gross domestic product of the United States that it cost, extraordinary cost at the time, while we were putting money into all the conventional weapons of World War II. You know, so today nuclear programs, they take trillions of dollars globally. If you think about that money that could go to healthcare, education, housing, retirement, you know, all these real problems people have, just lost to making weapons that are very expensive and then cause even more destruction and loss of life and property. You know, we talk about why is Social Security going bankrupt or something like that. This is one of the reasons, is that even in one of the richest nations on earth, it's because we spend so much money on weapons. You know, when I look at some of our leaders, they do seem like sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists. You know, people that are more interested in their reputation or their gain than human life. You may or may not have ever met anybody like this. You know, people like this are outliers. They say like 1 in 100 people is a sociopath, which is a lot actually. It means you will, and you probably have encountered them in life. But there aren't that many of them. Most humans just want to be safe, eat dinner with their families, love, find joy, meaning. No matter how much, each of us, think about it, no matter how much we dislike someone, how much they've hurt us, most of us can't even imagine insulting them to their face. Even that's kind of beyond the scope of our behavior we'd accept from ourselves, much less dropping a bomb on them, you know. So who are these people who are making these decisions that harm millions of people? How were they raised? How did their parents treat them? What violence did they experience? You know, trauma. What movies did they watch as young kids? Making heroes out of murderers. You know, even Han Solo in the first Star Wars, you know, Han Solo shot first. They were just showing that version of Star Wars in the very first version of Star Wars that some of us saw. I got to see it with my parents, you know, in 1977. And I remember Han Solo shot first. And George Lucas changed that, so he shot in self-defense. And so many people are angry about that, and they were cheering when Han Solo shot first, you know, and they showed that version of Star Wars last week in London. So what if this wasn't what, you know, all these people were exposed to? You know, what if they'd cultivated compassion, reconciliation, listening? What if they watched, you know, shows about the Dalai Lama and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., you know? What if we saw 100,000 movies about people like that? So we often think that our own anger is small, you know, that's harmless, or it's even natural, healthy to let it out. But if we had those same levers in front of us, you know, if we had the power of those in power with the control over bombs and armies, our anger might cause a lot more harm. I mean, this is why statistics say it's dangerous to keep a handgun at home. You know, that because most of the deaths from guns come during sudden arguments between loved ones, when the anger overtakes their reason, you know, if you have a gun lying around. I remember actually seeing Donald Rumsfeld on TV. I don't know how I saw it because I didn't watch TV much. But I think I was in like the pizza place or something they had on campus. I remember seeing Donald Rumsfeld on TV when he was appointed Secretary of Defense 25 years ago. He gave his speech. And I remember thinking really clearly, he seems like one of those angry dads. Like when I was growing up, some of my friends had really angry dads. My dad wasn't that angry. Well, he's here actually, he's listening. But I remember some of my friends had very angry dads. And I thought, wow, he's like an angry dad, you know? And then, you know, a few months later, what's he doing? If you put an angry dad in charge of the US military, they kill millions of people. Like, I was looking this up this morning when I was doing research for this. What is the cost of those wars that began in 1990, the War on Terror, as they call it? Over 400,000 civilians died. They say over 1 million people total, you know, including the combatants. And if you include, that's through direct violence. And then if you include deaths due to starvation, lack of health care, unsanitary conditions, things like that, they say the toll rises to 4 million dead. I got this study from Brown University, where I went to school. They did this study called the Cost of War Project, where every year they update the cost of the war on terror. It's also trillions of dollars, like $8 trillion. So personal transformation is real, and it can go either way. You can transform yourself toward violence. You can go from an angry dad to killing 1 million people. Or you can steer yourself toward nonviolence, because each act of kindness and patience, listening, particularly listening, it contributes to a more peaceful world. Every time we forgive, every time we give the benefit of the doubt, every time we just let anger pass through us, the anger just passed through me. Whenever we recognize anger as a delusion instead of feeding it. Some of you remember what my teacher said to me a couple years ago: anger doesn't feel good, right? That's why we cultivate the antidotes to it. And like Kazuhaga, great guest on our podcast last year and this year too, he says nonviolent movements are twice as successful as violent ones, and the ratio is growing. They're more and more successful. I don't know if some of you saw, they published pictures of the Situation Room. They never show what's on the screens, but they show the people looking at the screens. So we may not be in that Situation Room, but we're in our living rooms, in our classrooms, conference rooms at work, the Zoom room. Here we are in the Zoom room. And every moment that we choose patience over rage, listening over shouting, it's a small act that promotes peace. It really does. It really does. I remember, the Dalai Lama. Many times I've seen the Dalai Lama ask this question. It was really powerful the first time I heard someone ask it in San Francisco. How do we end wars? And he said, make up with the people you have conflicts with in your immediate life. That was all he said. That's the main cause. But then, we'll also do a meditation, like we have to do something with all our feelings. And part of it is wishing, or aspiration. We reflect, we feel, we wish. Not passively, but actively. Because aspiring to better behavior and a better world is a power of practice that works to transform our minds and change the world. It does plant seeds, not in any airy-fairy, supernatural way. It changes how we behave, how we listen, and then it ripples out to everybody we know and through a larger chain to millions of other people. So it is meaningful to wish peace and stability for all people, especially those in war zones right now, and we'll do that in a more meditative way. And wishing for an idea, an end to the idea of nations as superior from one another, separate from one another, inferior. These are all delusions born of what we'd say pride. Feelings of superiority or inferiority is another delusion from the Buddhist perspective. You could just as easily imagine the Middle East as a kind of little Europe or United States where all these different people had their differences. We have our differences in the United States, but in general, we're not killing one another. We don't have California stockpiling nuclear weapons against Washington State or something like that. You could easily imagine all the many differing opinions in the Middle East as part of one bigger country, or even a global community. There's no, doesn't have to be the way it is. They could still have your disagreements, but talk about them, have protests, yell on TV instead of killing one another and developing nuclear programs. People everywhere just want the same things, right? To love, to be loved, to live with purpose, to be free from suffering. And of course, the ultimate antidote to that is wishing to dissolve the illusion of otherness, the seeing people as other. I mean, you see how it spirals, It starts out just thinking you're a little different, a little separate, a little more important, a little less important. And then eventually it slides to the point that you're willing to kill someone else or drop bombs on their country because, we want something different than they do. Anyway, let's do the meditation. So get yourself into meditation posture. Straighten your spine, cross your legs if you're on the floor, or feet out and legs out and feet flat on the floor. Right hand on top of the left with your thumbs touching. Arms relaxed with a little space between your torso. Again, spine straight is the most important part, head tilted down. Relax all the muscles in your face, your shoulders. Mostly close your eyes if that's comfortable, to let yourself go inward without falling asleep. Touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth above your front top teeth. And today, more than other days, maybe it's quite palpable how fortunate we are to be safe, to live in a place that isn't a war zone. I can hear the little birds cheeping outside right now, see the beautiful sunlight. How extraordinarily lucky we are to live safely. But what do I want to do with this incredible opportunity I have, this gift of being safe, having some amount of resources and family, friends, work, if you have some or all of these, very fortunate. So what do we do with a life of some comfort and means? Well, anyone listening now has already made that decision that for some part of it, I'm going to work to bring out my best qualities, to figure out how to live the most meaningful, purposeful, powerful, happy, compassionate life I can. And that's not easy. There's so many influences in the other direction, to be selfish and aggressive and to crave and be impatient and judgmental. So pat yourself on the back, literally or figuratively. It's wonderful that you made it here, or if you're listening later on podcast, YouTube. It's not only okay to want to be happy, it's literally the purpose of our lives to figure out the genuine causes of happiness. And so our motivation is to do that, to bring out the true causes of happiness, the antidotes to all the different forms of suffering in our minds, and to do that for everybody we touch, and to recognize that words and actions are very powerful. Just a smile, a kind question, being quiet and really listening. You have no idea what great benefit that may have in the world. A few months or years later, that could be the cause of somebody, not pressing a button to drop a bomb, choosing dialogue over conflict. So motivation to wisely cultivate the causes of happy mind and a better world, better relationships, respect for all humanity. And then it really helps if you can remember anybody who is further along that path than you are. Of course, I'm Buddhist, so I think of a Dalai Lama and my teachers. I'm here in my meditation room, so I have all my teachers. You're supposed to have a picture of every teacher of yours on your altar. So mine now I have an annex. There's like, I think at least 30. So you may have at least one like that, like a spiritual teacher or a compassionate, wise hero, or someone humble and compassionate in your life. Like my sister-in-law, who I just saw, who's never heard say a bad word about anybody, always so compassionate, kind, generous. So wherever they are, think of them, or put them all together in front of you as a support, as refuge, and realize they weren't just born that way, that they bucked the trend, they cultivated the causes of a happy, kind, compassionate, effective mind, actions, life, day by day, moment by moment, action by action, word by word, often at odds with what society teaches us. And we're doing the same. We're doing just as they did, you know. There's nothing better we could do with the next few minutes than try to deepen those neural pathways for kindness, compassion, dialogue, love, universal respect for life. And then bring your mind to your breath. Today I think we'll meditate a little bit longer on the breath. We mostly focus on analytical meditation, but stabilizing meditation is very, very powerful if you can settle into it. One of the best ways to do that is actually to make a determination. Let's just try 3 minutes. Make the determination, I'm going to focus on my breath for 3 minutes. And if something else pops into my mind or I feel something in my body, I'll just let it pass by. No need to pull it close, no need to push it away. Return your mind to your breath. Today it might be nice to focus on the breath at the abdomen, you know, kind of near your belly button, going in and out. So for 3 minutes, focus on the breath. And now let's meditate on the end of war. And we start by cultivating compassion for all those caught in violence, both the victims and the perpetrators. It's hard to know where to start because we're so polarized. But certainly there are people that died in Iran yesterday. And even though the ones killed may have been doing something that we disagree with or that was harmful, they had families. They have partners, children, parents. Most of us have networks of dozens, hundreds of people that know us, care about us. They're just like us. Many Iranian civilians, hundreds have been killed in the past couple weeks. Just innocent people out going to buy milk and vegetables, just like us. Imagine yourself floating over Iran at first and just taking away all that suffering. All the people who grieving, wailing, who lost their son, daughter, parent, friend, partner. Wish that they be able to get over their grief. Wish that those planning and perpetrating violence immediately set down their arms, their plans, move instead toward peace. Do the same as you float over Israel. Imagine the vast majority, 99.9% probably, of the country who just wants to go home, eat some hummus and falafels and have a nice evening with their loved ones, live safely. Nobody wants to be at war. Most of the soldiers don't want to be at war. They're all forced to. They have to join the army in Israel. And feel compassion for those who lost loved ones in Israel too, that they get over their grief and anger. And those scared in the military, forced into combat. Especially wish that the leaders in both of these places realize that violence is illogical, as the Dalai Lama says. That sooner or later they have to find diplomatic solution to their problems, so why not do it now and save lives? Imagine the other conflicts in the region, with the Palestinian people, Lebanon, Syria, and so on. And imagine that everybody gets a clear head. Imagine a world where we still have differences, we still have disagreements, but we talk about them, we negotiate, we never fight. Everyone remains safe, and all that money we save goes towards healthcare and housing, taking care of the elderly, the homeless. Imagine the same now as you float over Ukraine and Russia. All those people who just want to go home, have a nice evening with their family, their loved ones. Send down a kind of blue healing light that helps everyone who lost somebody they loved get over their grief. That makes those planning and perpetrating violence immediately set down their arms and seek out nonviolent solutions to their problems. Imagine changing the minds of the leaders to be compassionate, caring, wise, kind. Imagine all the other conflicts in the world. There are some other conflicts just as bad or nearly as bad that we're ignoring in the news right now. Imagine everyone else suffering from violence, that they lay down their arms, that those who've suffered the loss of loved ones gradually get over their grief, and that the people, the very small minority of very aggressive, violent people driving these actions, that their minds are tamed. Imagine a world at peace. Still with disagreements, different religions, different perspectives, different points of view. But more like at least our country, where we're mostly not killing each other, even though we have big disagreements. Imagine just that. At least an end to physical violence, to weapons of mass destruction. It's fine, people still arguing a bit with each other, but at least not killing each other. Then reflect a little bit on the seeds of war within ourselves. Especially pride, feeling superior or inferior, anger, seeing only the negative in somebody and wanting to harm them. We feel that even toward our partner, our loved one sometimes, so it's understandable that you might feel it towards strangers with weapons pointed toward your country. Vengeance. We've been taught, so many movies show that vengeance works. It doesn't. But see how we each have some of those seeds in ourselves, some we can control better than others. And that the alternative is to plant the seeds of peace, which we each all have, and demonstrate patience. Patience is not returning harm. It doesn't mean accepting harm. It means not returning it. Listening, maybe the most important. Compassion, wanting to take away the suffering of everybody, even your so-called enemies. Love, how do you love everybody? With the Buddhist definition of love, of wishing others to be happy. We just wish everyone to be happy, to have what they need, because they certainly wouldn't be fighting. Nobody wants to be in a war. Reflect on whether what the Dalai Lama said is true, that if we want to end wars, we should start by making up with those we have conflicts. And if it doesn't feel safe to talk to someone, it doesn't mean that at all. Making up means in your mind. So you may never talk to the person you have a conflict with, but you forgive them, you understand them. Your mind eventually is no longer agitated when you think about them, what they did or said. Could that be true? That the biggest cause of peace in the world is to make up with all the people we have conflicts with. Wish that the leaders of all the nations, especially the ones at war, do this too. That their hearts soften, that their minds open, that they make decisions only that protect life. Imagine that world. Start to feel your way into the reality that war is not inevitable. It takes a lot of effort to fight. Especially when you look historically, there was so much room on earth. And these little bands of people would go out of their way to prepare, sometimes for years, gathering weapons, armor, and then go meet each other somewhere and kill each other. When there's so much space, so much resources, more than enough for everybody. It didn't make sense then either. War made no sense 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. It still doesn't. It makes less sense now, way less, given the weapons that we have. To feel into the reality that war is not inevitable, it's not logical, it doesn't make any sense. It's a product of delusion, anger, pride, jealousy, craving, ignorance. And that peace begins inside, just like we're doing now. Just one thought, may the world be at peace. May I make up with all my enemies. We have no idea what effect that may have as it ripples out into our lives. Then what if we start thinking that way every day? At least once a day, may the world be at peace. May I resolve all the conflicts in my own life. At the very least, the world moves a little bit. At the very least, a little bit in that direction through thoughts like these. So, if you have a daily meditation practice, maybe add that sentence into it. May the world be at peace. May I resolve the conflicts in my own life. And may our meditation today be a cause for peace in the world. May the wars in the Middle East end immediately. May those in Ukraine, Russia, end immediately. May everyone go home and start rebuilding, enjoy their families and relationships and friends. And may all the wars and conflicts and violence all over the world and in some people's homes also end immediately. May the world be at peace. Thanks for joining me for this episode of How to Train a Happy Mind. If you'd like to support this podcast and our nonprofit educational programs, please visit howtotrainahappymind.org. We accept any form of support, including Bitcoin, and your donations are tax-deductible in the U.S. All gifts, however small, help us keep offering these free and ad-free materials to anyone who wishes to build happier minds, more fulfilling relationships, and a better world. We'll be back next week with the full episode featuring Tenzin Chogkyi's meditation on joy. Until then, take care, and may even our smallest actions be a cause for peace.